Urgot, not beautiful. The bright sun shone over the fresh snow of the battleground at Summoner's Rift, a stretch of land encompassing a mountainous forest. Two bases sat at either end of the great forest. Immobile stone sentries guarded against anyone who would attack the walled bases, protecting the glowing buildings of great glowing energy. Behind the trio of buildings sat a greater construct, bustling small warriors and wizards in cloaked robes, rushing in and out of the building, arming the base for the arrivals of what seemed to be a war. And sitting further behind the bustling behemoth laid a circling glowing platform that was raised off the ground by a small flight of stone stairs. The gentle bulbs of small light danced around the platform quietly, making no intentions of ever changing their lazy flow. Just then, in either base the skies darkened. The small minions paused only slightly to notice the change in weather before quickly tasking themselves with what they were up to. As if to meet the darkening sky, the ominous platforms too began to stir and shake, the small balls of lightning following suit. Chilling wind picked up, and trees rocked from the hills as the air itself began to thin out, making way for a tremendous passage of energy. In a flash that came and went quicker than the blink of an eye, 5 figures now stood grouped with one of the base's platforms. Without saying anything, the minions quickly finished their work and then armed themselves, paving paths through the wooded mountains so the newcomers might take them without issue. The figures, too, crept quickly, with no words amongst themselves, grouping into pairs or rushing off alone into the woods, following their advancing waves of minions. In one lane, one of the summoned contenders raced on metallic, sinister legs. They creaked with a deathly chill as they plundered across the snowy trail, a revolting, monstrous body atop the mechanical legs. Rolls of pus-filled skin and fat sagged down, connected to each other only by mazes of scars and staples that just barely managed to keep the grotesque body in one piece. As the monster made his way down the lane, he approached one of the giant stone towers that mirrored the ones found within the summoning bases. Urgot had reached one of the outer tower of his lane. The great chance... The great monster froze, one hellish, burning green eye surveying the landscape, while the other eye lay dead, hidden behind a glass lens that gave the image something might be working under it. Metallic breaths came out in deep gasps as Urgot got his arms ready, one arm ending in a threatening cannon and the other in a twisting, razor-sharp blade. Urgot's wait was a short one, as the horizon quickly perked up with moving, glowing shapes. Leading the charge were minions that were much like Urgot's, possessing only blue armors and robes rather than purple ones Urgot's waves has donned. As the two opposing waves of minions rushed to confront one another, Urgot shifted his eye to another, more interesting sight. A winged, fully armored warrior flew a few yards above the cold ground, a large, intimidating sword clasped in her hands. To her side a robed woman strode, holding an icy bow to her side. From under her dark robe, snow-white hair whipped itself to the freezing air. Urgot readied himself. The two approachers began making short work of Urgot's minion lines, chopping them down with ease and allowing their own minions to advance. Urgot simply aimed his cannon arm and began to fire. The robed archer reacted first, quickly jumping to the side at the blast. It would have been a clean getaway, would it not be for the pulsating gas that spewed from the blast. It coated the robed figure, making her recoil back to cough and cover her mouth. The winged warrior simply flew above the scope of the gas, safely in the air. "Ash, you must move!" came a commanding female voice from behind the dark helmet. The robed figure nodded in understandment, and quickly turned to make her get away. Urgot, however, just cracked as much of a smile as he could from behind his Darth Vader-like mouth encasement. He fired a different shot, the one not firing in a steady line, but instead twisting in air, moving towards the robed woman with pinpoint accuracy. The wing judicator was the only one to notice this, as Ash was quickly running with her back to the homing missile. The flyer quickly adjusted her wing and dove to dive in the rescue of her companion, but her speed was no match for the windy missile. It struck the back of the small-framed Ash dead center, bloody ripping into her back and rupturing her lungs. Kale only stood in horror as she watched the missile detonate, sending the entire top of her friend into a bloody explosion that dotted the white landscape. Urgot cackled in triumph and quickly used Kale's hesitation to charge towards the remaining target. Kale turned in anger to the scuttling nightmare and began to raise her sword in battle of her foe, but Urgot proved much too quick for both Kale and his slow-looking body. With a great leap, Urgot grabbed Kale in midair, his metal spidlings clamping down on her power Kale could only submit to. They fell to the earth, and Urgot pinned Kale to the ground under his massive weight. Though she struggled, it was no use. She was at his mercy. If he was going to show any mercy, that was. Urgot rubbed his weaponic hands together, plotting how to best dispatch his prized catch. It didn't take him long to decide. With a few thoughts he summoned a long, snaking, penis-like appendage from under his various sledges of flesh. Kale's eyes widened in horror as the tentacle found its way straight into her virgin asshole. The tentacle forced its way inside, not stopping once it forcibly began to climb through her entire body. Urgot laughed out loud as Kale's screams were quickly muffled by the tentacle lodging itself deep inside the back of her throat. Only then did it begin to let off a bit, but only to re-jam itself within Kale's innards. Urgot began to quicken the thrusting, while Kale felt like every organ in her body was being beaten on with a red-hot metal bar. The pain was so immense, Kale almost blacked out several times. The only thing keeping her awake was her will not to give up so easily. Urgot simply sped up his organ fucking. With a final few heaves, Urgot released a spewing thick liquid of radiating sperm into Kale's inner mouth. Kale's nostrils erupted in twin waterfalls of rushing semen, while her brain itself was painfully coated with it. Kale cried tears of chunky, glowing semen, while Urgot continued his mocking laughter. He finally retracted the fiendish phallus while Kale's broken, desecrated body lay unmoving in the snow. Urgot then picked his mass off from the body and skittered towards the haft body of the Frost Archer. "This will do, yes," Urgot voiced to himself. He hefted the body over one shoulder before turning back to the broken Kale. "And you still have a use as well." Urgot retrieved his second wisdom and stood as a shimmering, pulsing blue light surrounded him. Within a few seconds the three disappeared, leaving only disrupted snow, blood, and sperm to mark themselves. Urgot reappeared back at its base on the same platform he came onto when he first arrived. Scuttling towards a small shop booth, Urgot summoned up the shopkeeper from inside. A large, warded pink troll in a thick purple robe approached the booth table. "What is it that is inquired?" the shopkeeper asked him in a muddly voice. "I have what you've been looking for," Urgot said as he slammed the bottom half of ash onto the table in front of the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper, looking interested, stroked his bald chin as he hefted the legged corpse up to himself. With one grasp he tore away the archer's pants, uncovering her vagina. He silently bit away, removing the entire vagina with his gaping mouth in only one bite. He gnawed away as if a fat kid would while consuming a spongy hostess cake, licking his lips as he finished. "Is good," was all he said as he placed the rest of his corpse behind the shelf and reached back onto something else. "And then, of course, I would like what is to be mine, then." Urgot rammed the sharp metal end of the dildo into his large belly button, securing it within his own skin. With his new stomach dick, Urgot again continued out of his base to hunt for more victim. His second prize still draped over his arm. It wasn't long before Urgot came to heads with his third enemy. A tall, commanding man with a powerful sword that rivaled that of Kale stood in the midst of a large minion battle, easily chopping away many of Urgot's minions. Urgot moved in. The large warrior took notice of Urgot, along with who he had in tow. With one war cry, the warrior leapt forth and charged Urgot. Urgot, however, was prepared. He sucked his immense stomach in, and with it the dildo. He gathered kinetic energy from the power of his own stomach. Urgot forced to arch his back inwards, letting loose the muscles in his stomach. The spiked phallus rocketed out in a bloody launch, bolting it straight into the battle-erected penis of Garin. Garin shot back in pain and pleasure as the hard, cold dildo ravaged his urethra and rocketed into his scrotum, scorching his testicles with the rocket fire. Urgot used this hesitation to his advantage, shooting his worm-like penis to Garin's neck. He wrapped around the neck, constricting it with his slender yet powerful penis. Garin tried to fight, but his fingers couldn't hope to pry the powerful cock noose from his neck. But Urgot had more use in store for the defenseless Garin than simple lynching. No, he had much more. Urgot jerked with powerful quickness on Garin's neck, quickly and forcefully ripping the head from the bloodied body. Urgot laughed as he head-fucked the severed head, using its eye sockets as a twin vagina. Once he was satisfied, he slung Kale down from his shoulder and prepared his satanic sex drive. He held Garin's head from the air as he moved over Kale's now exposed vagina. He slammed his penis as hard as possible into the back of Garin's tongue, forcing himself inside of it. Like a puppet, Urgot began controlling Garin's tongue as he quickly began to fuck Kale's bruised vagina with Garin's cold, dead tongue. Kale murmured a bit in her sleep as Urgot forced the tongue deeper and deeper into Kale. "Oh! Oh, Garin!" Kale whispered to herself as she began to wake up. She stared down at the head with moist eyes, thanking the gods for what she had experienced before was nothing but a hellish nightmare. Then she saw what was connected at the end of Garin's neck. Kale's scream shook the forest as she tried to struggle away from the disgusting puppet. Urgot, just as he always had, laughed. Picking the puppet up, he bludgeoned Kale in the face with the forehead of Garin's severed head, crushing Kale's skull and denting her brain. Kale fell, now as a vegetable, back onto the ground. Urgot laughed as he discarded the head and moved back over to Kale, his new sex toy. Urgot positioned himself over Kale's bloody dent, flexing his muscles until his anus, now a rather large hole in his waist, opened. He took a large, chunky, winding shit on Kale's face. Blood and feces combined as the shit slowly oozed down into Kale's head. A splash of urine joined the fray and quickened the shit's descent into Kale. Kale was now effectively Urgot's human toilet. Urgot smirked another fiendish smirk as he heaved Kale back onto his shoulder, the piss and shit rolling out back onto Kale's face and down Urgot's back. "Let's go. There's more work to be done," Urgot said to his new sex toilet. With another chuckle, Urgot continued back into the forest, eager for more victims. The end.